It's happened before. Not very much, though. All right, let's start out reading, and we'll read verses 1 through 3, and then we'll discuss some stuff. It says, And Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. 127. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died in Kirjatharba, the same is Hebron in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Abraham stood up from before his dead and spake unto the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Give me possession of a burial place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. We have been privileged to see Abraham through the peaks of his life, through the valley of his life. We have seen him go through pinnacle of faith and obedience, such as last week, with offering his only son up, or willing to. And now we see him go through the valley of the shadow of death. If we live long enough, we will all deal with grief in our lives, or have already, and probably will again. But as we look at Abraham, we see that it was a time of farewell for him. There was a sadness in his separation. They were married, they say, probably about 70 years. And if you think of being married to someone for 70 years and then losing them, that's most of your life. I mean, for them, it was about half their life, the age she was. But that's someone you grow to really love, and you grow to really become close to. And I know that maybe people in here, I don't know, or maybe people you know who have lost a spouse, and they know what the loss is like. And people say that when you lose a loved one, they always say, well, I understand what you're going through, but you don't. You know, no matter who you've lost, whether you both people's lost a child, both people's lost a parent, both people's lost a spouse, you still don't know, because everybody grieves in different ways. We all deal with it in different ways, but it's a kind of separation that all of us are going to have sometime. Hebrews 9:27 said, as it appointed unto man once to die, but after this the judgment. There, I believe, and I believe there's scriptures to back it up, that there's a set time that we're going to die, that we can't change that. You know, we can try to do anything we can to prevent it, which is what we should do, you know, such as going to the hospital, sicknesses, trying to heal sicknesses. But there comes a time in every life when that choice is made by God. But when it comes, we're never quite prepared for it. Even if it's a prolonged thing, such as cancer, or a sickness that someone had for a while, where people say, well, you're more prepared for it. Well, you're really not, because when that comes, you're not prepared to deal with it. But one thing that we do know is Revelation 21:4 says, and God shall wipe away all the tears from their eyes. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. So even though the sorrow comes, the good thing to know is they're not in pain anymore. And they don't have to go through the suffering. You know, when a baby comes into the world, we do what? We rejoice. And we cry tears of joy. When a person leaves the world, we cry. And we mourn. We're sorrowful. When it really should be the opposite. Because you're bringing a baby into a world that's corrupt. I mean, this world is so wicked now that I don't know, how it could last much longer. So when they leave, they'll leave into a better place. So we're not mourning for them, are we? We're mourning for us, the ones who are left behind. So I believe that's what Abraham's doing here. He's having a time of sadness, a time of mourning for the loss of his wife here. But then we have the sting of sorrow. When death entered to the home of Abraham, it broke his heart. The Bible says that he came to mourn and to weep for Sarah. These words mean to wail and to shed tears. And by the way, this is a natural reaction to death. I never understood when people come up to someone at a funeral and say, don't cry. Your body has to cry. You've got to get it out. It's a natural reaction to death. We know Christ as being a strong person, right? But yet, when he came to the tomb of Lazarus, what did he do? It says he wept. One of the shortest verses in the Bible, Jesus wept. F.B. Mayer said, tears relieve the burning brain as a shower of the electric clouds. Tears just discharge the insupportable agony of the hearer, as an overflow lessens the pressure of the flood against the dam. Tears are the material of which heaven weaves its brightest rainbows. Tears are transmuted into the jewels of a better life, as the wounds in the oyster turn to pearl. So it seems like pain always has a better outcome. You have the rain come. What comes after rain? A rainbow. The oyster has pain. What comes after that? Pearls comes from it. So there's always something better that comes from the pain. And it doesn't look that way at first We all know that, but eventually there's something good comes out of it. But there's a psychiatrist by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I might have heard of her. She has 5 stages of grief. And these are the 5 stages that you will go through when you lose the loss of a loved one. You may not hit them all. You may hit them out of order. You may hit them in exactly the right order. But most likely you can go through all of them. The first one is denial and isolation. When the death first happens, we deny that it happened. We try to say, this is not happening to me. This is not happening to our family. And what you do then is you tend to isolate yourself from everybody else. You want to go into a room by yourself and cry. You don't want to leave the house. You don't want to go anywhere. You really don't want to go to the funeral. You don't want to go make plans for anything because it's like you want to just, everybody leave you alone. Don't talk to you. Don't be there with you because you're still trying to grasp the fact that they're not there. And I know that y'all dealt with it. We dealt with it, and it's one of the hardest things you're going to deal with, to know that you can't just go in there and call them or go in there and pick them up from the crib or anything that, we would normally do in those situations. But then not only do we have denial and isolation, but we have anger. And we always hurt the ones we love the most. And you're going to go through anger. You may be angry at the doctors for not doing more. You may be angry at yourself because you don't feel you did enough for them. You may be angry at your siblings because they didn't do enough, that they weren't there enough for you. You may even be angry at God because He took your loved one. And the one that we should not do is we should not be angry at God, because it's easy to be angry at God, but He's still on the throne. And He doesn't do anything that's going to hurt us. And just like, with Miss Marie or people that you've lost, I don't know who you have lost in your family, or even Austin, we think, why now? Why at that time? And that's when you start giving that feeling toward God of, why did you do this? And I don't believe there's anything wrong with asking God why. I worked with hospice for 5 years, and I've had several people say to me, well, I know I can't ask God why. And I'm like, well, why not? I'm like, He wants you to talk to Him. He wants you to ask Him why this is happening. And your anger most likely will be pushed toward the person that you're closest to most of the time. And it's hard because we've dealt with this and in our family through this tragedy. I'm sure y'all have dealt with it, where people say things that they don't mean. And they say hurtful things that you can't forget. But you got to realize that they're going through that stage of anger. And it's going to happen, that you got to get through it. The third stage is bargaining. And basically what it means is the if-only questions. If only I had done this. If only I had spent more time with him. And our question all the time is, if only I had known what to do when I smelled, wires burning, which I have been, living for 32 years, and I've smelled wires burning and a plug-in, and it did absolutely nothing. So you have these questions of, what if I would have taken them out of the room? What if I would have unhooked the plug-in and find out what the wires were doing? But then I thought, I'm not an electrician. I have no clue what's going on with it. So we have these questions, and they're normal questions. But the one thing we can't do during grief is we can't beat ourselves up over it. Because no matter what we would have done that night, Austin still would have died. And you may not have had a fire, we may not have lost everything, but he still would have died. And you and your family, when you've lost a loved one, you could have done everything possible that you know of to prevent the inevitable from happening. And you still couldn't have done it. So what bargaining is we're basically making a deal with God in our minds that to postpone the inevitable. To say, God, if I would have done this, then you would have postponed their death. Which He wouldn't have. Because I believe we have an appointed time to die. And as I said, it's not going to change. So we can't ask that if-only question. Because all you're going to do to yourself is you're going to kill yourself mentally, emotionally, and physically. And you're going to just wear yourself down so much. And it causes more anger. So the if-only question brings us back to the second stage, and that's anger. Which could bring us back to the first stage, which is isolation. Because as you're going through these stages, you don't go 1, 2, 3 and then stop at 3 and then keep going down. You go back to 1 sometimes. Or you go back to 2. So you may be bargaining with God and then go back to anger because now it brings up something else that you're angry about. And then you isolate yourself because you don't want to talk to anybody. So then you just went back down to 1 again when you're trying to get to 3 or 4. So you had denial and isolation, anger, and bargaining. The fourth thing you have is depression. This is related to the practical implications of the loss. The practical implications of the loss, such as How are we going to do the funeral? Do we have the money to pay for a funeral? What are we going to do about the burial? Are we going to get a headstone for him? It all goes to the practical implications of what just happened. How are we going to go on without this person? And the one thing I hate about death, and I'm sure all of us hate it, is it's permanent. It's like you can't go back and, you try to think in your mind, well, maybe they're on vacation and they're coming back. Or maybe it didn't really happen. And sometimes you think, maybe I'll wake up from this nightmare and it won't be there anymore. But it's permanent. So the depression sets in at the beginning because you got to have all these plans of making a funeral, and funerals cost unbelievably too much money, and they're not something that we want to think about. So you have that the practical implication, but then the second part of depression is you have a quiet preparation to prepare ourselves for the separation and the farewell. So your second depression is preparing your life, your mind, for the fact that they're not coming back. And to pray your heart for the fact that I've got to say goodbye somehow. Some people can go to the grave, the cemetery, and that gives them closure. I can't do it. He's right out there, but I can't make myself walk over to that tomb because he's not there. That is a shell of what he used to be. He's probably running around heaven right now. And it doesn't give me closure to go over there. What gave me closure was to go to the house a few days later after, I got out of the hospital and everything, and to look at the bed that was still there, the metal part of the bed and the place where he was laying. That's what gave me closure, to know that he was laying down. He was sleeping when it happened. So there may be several things that can give us closure, but that depression happens because it prepares you for the separation and to bid them farewell. So after you have denial and isolation, after you have anger, bargain, and depression, the very final step is acceptance. It's accepting that it happened. Now, they say the normal time span for losing a child or a spouse is 10 years. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be over it in 10 years. And I think a parent is 7 years, 8 years. I don't know. Nobody knows. I'm just going by what I've learned through hospice, what I've learned through grief counseling, that they say about 7 to 10 years on a normal. But what happens is you don't move past it. You don't forget about them. You don't get over it. It's like someone made a statement one time to somebody, it's been 10 years. You should be over this by now. You don't get over a death in the family. And I know that's not what you want to hear. It's not what I want to hear either. But what you do is you learn to live a new life without them. You create a new normal in your life. And the new normal is they're not coming back, but they're in heaven. And what they want us to do is they want us to continue to be happy. And I told Dawn several times she'd be happy about something. And she's like, I feel so guilty for being happy. And I'm like, Dawn, don't feel guilty for being happy. That is the Holy Spirit of God that is giving you the ability to be happy during a time like this. It's the Spirit saying, look, I've got Austin, I've got Miss Marie. We're having church in heaven all day long. And Miss Marie would love that, right? Church all day long. I mean, she don't get to hear me preaching anymore. She gets to hear Jesus Christ preaching all the time. I don't know if that's what it is, but that's what I imagine. So we come to a point where you accept that it's happened. You accept that you got to create a new normal for you, not to move on. And when you get to this acceptance stage, don't be surprised if you go back again. If you go back to 1, or you go back to 2, or you go back to 3, or go back to 4, because grief it's a roller coaster ride. You'll be up here and you'll be doing great today, and you think that you're really doing well, and boom, something happens, and you drop back down to 1 again, and you drop back down to 2 again. The reason I'm telling you all this is because I want you to know that what you feel in your life because of grief is normal. People can say, well, you're not doing it right. There's no right way to grieve. You may be 20 years before you get to acceptance, and then you may drop down to anger again because you see a picture or you see something that reminds you of them. And that's what Abraham's dealing with here. I said all that not only to help all of us because I know we deal with grief, but to make us realize that that's what Abraham was going through. And he came to mourn for Sarah and to weep with her. I don't know how much time is between verse 2 and verse 3, but what Abraham does is he's mourning here, and then it says he stood up. What he was doing was he was done mourning at this moment, and he was going to get up and do what? Go back to life. Because we can't stop life. And I had no clue, what